again talking about the history of the Coptic people and the Church of Egypt. We have reached the 9th century of the rule in Egypt. Basically, Egypt was under the control of the Abbasid dynasty. The Abbasid dynasty ruled from Baghdad in modern-day Iraq. Several caliphs took power of Egypt. Basically, the life in Egypt was now the majority were for the Muslim population. The people in Egypt who were originally all Christian became now moved into a majority of Muslim citizens and a lesser of Christians in Egypt. Persecution never really disappeared. It went from one state to the other, basically. There were times that there was less persecution and times that there were more persecution, but it always existed for the Copts of Egypt. Several revolutions against the Muslim governor, mostly due to tax collection, oppression, curtailing of freedoms, oppression of freedom of worshipping, and persecuting Christians in their way of life and the worship. The latest was the Bashamurian Revolution in 808. This was not supported actually by the popes like the previous revolution of 748. The Muslim governor was, of course, wanted to quell this revolution. His name was Omar ibn al-Walid. The popes at the time, both the Byzantine and the Coptic pope, were not supportive of this revolution, and they actually sent letters to the revolutionaries to stop their action, and that there was no chance for them to win against the more organized, the more trained Arab soldiers that invaded the country at the time. They did not want to stop the revolution. They were hoping for reinforcements from the south of the country, from Nubia. Were supportive of a Christian country in Egypt, but due to the numbers of the Arabs, soldiers very much well trained than the Egyptians, who were never trained in the arts of war and were never actually a warring nation. They were very pacifist. They were utterly destroyed. And again, the country fell under the Muslims and the Muslim governor. Actually, the Khalifa al-Ma'mun at the time changed the governor because he heard of the oppression that he exercised over the people of Egypt. After several caliphs took power of Egypt, the Abbasid caliphs took power of Egypt, and at the same time, the conditions for the Egyptians, whether Muslim or Christian, never changed. Still, there was a lot of oppression that was going on for the Egyptians, ending with the invasion by the Andalusian Umayyad dynasty again. That was repelled, and again the Abbasid took power. Finally, the country fell into the hands of Ahmad ibn Tulun. He took power of the country and changed it from being under the rule of the Abbasid caliphs to under his rule, a form of a king that was ruling Egypt, and he was able to hand over the country to his offsprings. During his time, and even before his time, large amounts of money were extorted from Egyptians, and specifically from the bishops and from the Pope, to be able to accord him the position of Pope. This was a sort of tradition that was going on for some time. Pope Michael III who was in power, or came to the See of St. Mark in 880. He ruled till 907. He actually started a very bad habit, or due to the lack of funds to the church, he charged money for positions in the church, for actually being a bishop, or for being a priest, or for being anything that was done in the church. He extorted money from these people. This habit of asking for money was started by this Pope, Pope Michael, and continued thereafter. It was not stopped until several centuries afterwards. In the 10th century in Egypt, life was difficult for the Copts. Several governors and rulers and caliphs took power of the country. Egypt was still under the rule of the Abbasid Caliphate, and then passed into the Ptolemaic power. Then under the Urshidid dynasty in Egypt. Egypt was basically a fight for them. They collected the money, and irrelevant of the well-being of the people of Egypt. The Copts basically and Christians suffered the most under the rule of the Arabs, where they usurped their land, their money, even their own livelihood. To mention, the problem that the Copts found themselves into was that they needed money to pay off the Muslim governors, basically the jizya, which is the surtax that they imposed on the bishops and the popes. The pope usually had to pay anywhere between a few thousand gold pieces to up to 20,000, 30,000, whatever the Muslim ruler decided. So Pope Michael III at one point collected the money by practicing simony, which is charging for positions in the church, and that actually created a lot of problems for the church later on. He also collected the money from the Alexandrian churches, which had they were under their own administration, and by doing so, they asked him to pay 1,000 pieces of gold every year from then on to the Alexandrian churches, the collective Alexandrian churches, which he agreed upon. This practice was upheld by the Alexandrian churches for every pope that came after that, up until Pope Theophilus II, which is the 60th Pope of Egypt, where he, upon his beginning of his papacy, he was confronted with that dilemma. He was actually an elderly man. He refused outright to pay, saying that the church did not have the money, and he started to get very aggravated by the demand of the Alexandrian churches, to the point that he became so mad that he took off his habits and threw it at them. Now the entourage that he had with him, the other bishops, decided to calm him down and take him away from that meeting, and decided to travel by boat to Babylon to seek medical help for him. Due to the stress that the poor Pope was in, he actually lost his mind and started to yell and scream in the boat. And instead of calming his nerves, he died from distress in an argument with another bishop. And this was a great scandal in the history of the Copts, and for the popes in particular in that time, due to the extreme stress that the popes and bishops were put under by the oppressive forces, that they had to collect this money in order to secure their position or to appease the governors and rulers at the time. After that, the country fell under the rule of the Fatimid dynasty. The Fatimids actually claim that they are the descendants of Fatima, which is the daughter of the Prophet Muhammad in Arabia. They originated in Cyrene, which is Qayrawan, which is one of the western provinces to the west of Egypt. They invaded northern Africa. They took over all the lands from that was originally owned by the Abbasid dynasty, the Ptolemies and the Irshidids, and they became the Fatimids Empire that collectively ruled over Egypt and the Pentapolis and until Nubia. The Fatimids designated a governor on Egypt, which was Gawhar al-Saqali. He was originally of Greek origin. He did a lot of buildings in Egypt dedicated to the dynasty that he was serving, the Fatimid dynasty. A great miracle occurred during his time, one that's worthy of mention. During the time of and the reign of Al-Mu'izz Lidinillah. Al-Mu'izz was actually, I believe he was in Egypt, and he was very ambivalent still to the Coptic Christian community in Egypt. He had, one of his advisors was a Jew by origin and by religion that changed from becoming a Jew to an apostate to become a Muslim at the end. He helped and he worked with Al-Mu'izz, and he convinced him that one of these days they are having these debates about religion, and he told him about a word that was mentioned in the Bible. Continuing with the story of Pope Abraham, the 62nd Pope of Alexandria, and 975 of the popes. Pope Abraham was confronted by Al-Mu'izz about this passage in the Bible, talking about if you have so much as like faith as much as a grain of mustard, you can ask mountain to move and it will move. This was brought about by one of his advisors, as still Al-Mu'izz was very ambivalent about religions. His advisor was called Ibn Killis. He was originally a Jew, and Al-Mu'izz was interested in religious debates and interfaith communication and whatnot at the time, and Pope Abraham was called in to weigh in on this debate. He asked one of the people that were very knowledgeable at the time was Ibn al-Muqaffa, or Severus Ibn al-Muqaffa. He was actually accompanying him at this time, and yes, he said, yes, this passage is mentioned in the Bible. So Ibn Killis pushed Al-Mu'izz to tell him that, well, you have to prove it. So to prove this situation, he told him, either you prove this passage that it is true, and if you have so much faith you can move a mountain, or all the Christians in Egypt will perish by the sword. So Pope Abraham was like dumbfounded what he can do. So he asked for 3 days as just a period to reflect and pray and to ask for a divine help in this situation, as they will be killed after 3 days, put to the sword all the Christians in Egypt. So he went back to his church and started praying, and about the night he fell asleep, and he had an apparition from the Virgin Mary to seek out a man by the name of Sam'an Kharraz, or Simeon the Tanner. This is exactly what he did. When Pope Abraham woke up, he got up immediately and he went out of the gates of the church, and immediately he found this Simeon the Tanner walking around with a water bag that he used to. He asked him first, the Virgin Mary in the dream told him that of a sign that this man has one eye only. So he asked him, like, are you Simon the Tanner? He told him, yes, I am Simon the Tanner. So he asked him what he was doing. He goes to him, before I go to work in tanning leather, I take this water bag and go to people who cannot, or the sick and the elderly that cannot fetch water for themselves. So he told him the story about moving the mountain and whatnot. So Simon the Tanner told him, okay, we're we're going to go to the mountain and I'll be behind you, but you don't announce anything about me. Pope Abraham at the time agreed, and he, of course, at the designated day, he went with all the bishops, the priests, the Copts of Egypt. They were going to be put to the sword if the mountain doesn't move. And of course, they started praying, and they had the whole mass outside, and they started praying. And every time they knelt down to say Kyrie eleison, the mountain started to rumble as if there was an earthquake, and it moved. And this was documented in all the history books, and something that a lot of people witnessed. The mountain moved, actually, to the point that moved once, not twice, but several times. And the mountain, to the point that the mountain actually, every time they knelt, the mountain jumped up to the point that the sun rays were seen from underneath. After this huge miracle, El-Mu'izz changed his attitude with the Christians of Egypt 180 degrees. Immediately after this happened, Pope Abraham wanted to look for Simon the Tanner, and he was nowhere to be found. It was said that he disappeared. He asked not to be found again, and he was never found again, actually. There was no mention of him again in history anywhere. There is a huge big church in El-Muqattam mountain dedicated to Simon the Tanner, and it exists till our days. Pope Abraham, after that, with the El-Mu'izz, who became more accepting to the Christian faith and the Christians in Egypt, he asked him what would he desire to be done for the Christians, because he actually believed in the faith of the Copts in Egypt. He asked for a few churches, and he told him he's ready to pay from his money and from the state money. He refused. Pope Abraham refused. And he asked for the churches to be given back, to fix them and to make them ready for worshiping. And with that part, we can end the 10th century, and we will continue next time. Thank you.